Piers Morgan thought he could corner Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with a smug insult. What he didn't anticipate was a calm, fact-loaded response that not only left him speechless, but had the audience erupting in applause. They'd promised her a fair interview. At least that's what her chief of staff had said when he booked it. Just a back and forth about civil rights. Supposedly they wanted a strong voice. They said he'd keep it respectful. But when Jasmine Crockett walked into that studio in Burbank on Thursday morning, something felt off. Not dramatic, not overt, just off. The kind of vibe you only pick up if you've spent enough time in rooms like this. The makeup team's quiet glance, the hesitant silence when she greeted the assistant producer, the subtle tension in the air. It all pointed to something brewing. Piers Morgan was already in his chair when she stepped onto the set. He didn't stand to greet her. He just gave a quick nod and glanced at his notes. She sat down, adjusted her mic, and offered a polite smile. Morning. He looked up, returned the smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Good morning. Congresswoman Crockett, let's have a spirited conversation, shall we? Live in 30 seconds. Jasmine shifted slightly in her chair, spine straightening out of instinct. She was used to being underestimated. Raised in Shreveport by a high school cafeteria worker and a truck driver, she had spent years practicing law in Dallas before stepping into politics. She wasn't about to shrink for anyone. The stage lights flicked on. A producer pointed. We're live in 3, 2. The music faded. Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored, he began, his voice crisp and confident. Today, we're joined by Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in the Democratic Party, and someone with, let's say, very vocal opinions on race, justice, and American policing. She smiled calmly. Thank you for having me. He didn't waste time. Congresswoman, you've been extremely outspoken about what you call systemic racism in America. But many would argue this country elected a black president, twice, and currently has a black female vice president. Doesn't that suggest we've made enormous progress? It was a trap. Present the illusion of equality, then challenge anyone who points out otherwise. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Progress doesn't erase what's still broken, Mr. Morgan. It only means we've come far enough to keep pushing. Piers tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Yet, you often speak in such dramatic terms, he said. You once compared certain police policies to state-sponsored brutality. Isn't that a bit emotionally driven? He let the word hang. Jasmine let the silence linger before answering, steady and soft. I'm emotionally driven when I see mothers burying sons who never made it to 20. Yes, I feel things. That doesn't make me irrational, it makes me human. But I didn't come here with feelings. I came with facts. Piers wasn't looking for balance, he was angling for a clip, something he could use later. He leaned forward. And do those facts ever include personal accountability? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Absolutely. But let's not pretend the system treats all accountability the same. We both know it doesn't. The control room was tense. The floor director glanced between the teleprompter and the crew. The interview was veering off script, fast, but Jasmine wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't gesturing. She was giving him nothing to twist into a viral meltdown, and she was just getting started. Piers adjusted his tie, trying to appear casual, but she recognized the setup. The next question wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. Congresswoman, let's be real. Isn't it exhausting constantly painting America as some kind of villain? There's a difference between healthy criticism and, well, bitterness. The word landed like a punch. Bitterness. Not just a shot at her politics, but at her personality. At her very right to feel angry. She leaned back, unflinching. You think calling out injustice is bitterness? Then maybe you've gotten too comfortable being part of the audience. His jaw twitched slightly. He hadn't expected that. Let's be honest, she continued. You can't praise someone like MLK every January, then turn around and label people bitter in June for pointing at the exact same walls he did. There was a soft hum from the audience. Not loud, but audible. You're clearly passionate. I respect that, Piers said, attempting to recover. But don't you worry, that this constant race-based lens only divides people more? Wouldn't we be better off moving past it? She shook her head gently. That's like telling someone to stop mentioning the rain while they're standing in a thunderstorm. He chuckled, trying to brush it off. Clever. But let's get serious. You once criticized law enforcement after a high-profile shooting. The officer was later cleared of wrongdoing. Yet you never walked back your statements. Doesn't that show you were reacting before the facts came out? Her expression stayed neutral, but inside she felt a knot of disappointment. There it was. The same old trap. Paint her as someone who jumps the gun. Someone who cries race before facts. She paused, long enough to show she wasn't rattled. Tell me something, Mr. Morgan. Do you think a system that clears officers 99% of the time is automatically just? Or is it possible the system itself needs scrutiny? He opened his mouth, but she pressed on. Because if we're using clearance rates as proof of innocence, maybe you should re-examine what happened in Mississippi last year. 2 unarmed. Teens shot during a routine stop. Body cam off. Officers cleared in days. That wasn't justice. That was a cover-up. And the families are still waiting for answers. Real names, real incidents, no slogans, just evidence. Piers looked momentarily shaken. He flipped a page on his notepad, a blank one, stalling. She leaned forward, steady. You want to talk about facts? Let's talk about them. I don't come with slogans. I come prepared. The silence in the studio grew heavier. Even the makeup artist offstage froze, brush still in hand. But Piers wasn't done. I just think it's dangerous, he said slowly. To keep telling young Black Americans that they're victims. Doesn't that limit them more than the system ever could? Jasmine stopped smiling. She placed her hands gently on the desk, voice steady. What's dangerous is telling young Black Americans to stay quiet about pain. What's dangerous is pretending resilience means silence. We've been resilient, we've been strong, and we've also been ignored until we screamed. A quiet yes came from somewhere in the audience. Someone else clapped but stopped midway, unsure. Sure, Jasmine said, tilting her head slightly. We could tell them to move on, pretend it's all fine, that nothing ever happened. That would be more comfortable, wouldn't it? Piers blinked, said nothing. Jasmine could tell. He wasn't in control anymore. He was reacting. But what came next would change the tone of the entire segment. Before he even opened his mouth, Jasmine could see it coming. Piers tilted his head, took a breath, and flashed that calculated smile, the kind that says, I'm about to offend you, but I'll code it in civility so you can't call it that. Congresswoman, he began, his voice slow and deliberately composed. You say you're bringing facts, but let's be honest. Your tone, your body language, even your social media, everything screams emotion. You come across as angry, not analytical, and people watching, but well, they notice. There it was. Angry. Not passionate, not assertive, not confident, angry. It was an old tactic. One used whenever women, especially Black women, spoke with conviction. Slapped the angry label on them, and the rest would fall into place. Jasmine didn't react right away. She didn't need to. The room already had. A crew member winced. A camera operator shifted uncomfortably. She let the silence drag just long enough to make him squirm. Then, calmly, she asked, Do you ask Senator Burr the same thing when he shouts on your show and pounds the desk? Do you stop the interview to comment on his body language? Piers blinked, caught off guard. Or is passion only a problem when it's coming from someone like me? Still, her tone was even. Not emotional. Not theatrical. She was dissecting. His double standard in real time. I come across as angry to you, she continued, because I'm not backing down. I don't speak with your accent. I don't ask permission to feel things. But nothing I've said here today is based on emotion. It's based on experience. And that makes it more credible than whatever Wikipedia page you skimmed this morning. The audience laughed. Not mockingly, but with that distinct energy of someone landing a clean hit. Piers chuckled too, but his eyes had narrowed. Oh, I see. So now we're making this about my background? He asked. No, she said simply. You made it about mine. I'm just reminding you I don't need your permission to speak, or to challenge you. You invited me here to talk. Don't be surprised when I actually do." His smirk faltered. She wasn't done. "I've spent years in courtrooms, Piers. You know what doesn't hold up in court? Tone, eyebrows, social media posts. You know what does? Evidence. So let's stick to that." He tried to jump in, but she cut him off smoothly. "Since you brought up social media, let's talk about yours. You tweeted last year that kneeling during the national anthem was attention-seeking theater. That's your right. But what were you seeking when you walked off your own show in 2021 because someone criticized your comments about Meghan Markle?" The studio gasped. It wasn't performative. It was genuine surprise. She had gone there. And she wasn't backing down. You can call it a meltdown, or a moment of honesty. Either way, it wasn't analytical, it was emotional. And yet, here you are, acting like you're the adult in the room. Piers sat still, his face unreadable, but his posture had shifted. He looked smaller in the chair now. "You asked me if I was bitter," she continued, voice still soft, still deliberate. "I'm not, but I am tired. Tired of having to prove I belong at every table. Tired of explaining pain. Tired of being measured by standards that shift depending on who's watching." She paused again. This time the silence was heavier. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Even the audience held its applause, still catching up with what had just been said. Piers reached for his pen, tapping it against the desk. A nervous tick. "Well," he muttered, trying to recover, "you've clearly prepared a few zingers." She didn't smile. "No, I came prepared for the truth. If that feels like a zinger, maybe it says more about you than me." But Jasmine knew stopping there wouldn't be enough. Not if she wanted the truth to land beyond the studio. She noticed the way Piers was gripping his pen now. The camera didn't catch it, but she saw it. The subtle sign of a man realizing the ground was shifting underneath him. He tried again. "Congresswoman, I think we're veering off. This isn't about me. You're here to answer for your positions, not question mine." She raised an eyebrow. "Not dramatically. Just enough. You said earlier that my views divide people, that I'm emotional, that I push a victimhood narrative. You made it personal the moment you framed my humanity as a flaw, and now you want to walk it back because I answered with facts you didn't expect." He hesitated, blinking. She didn't give him a moment to regroup. "You want to talk about division? Let's rewind." She looked directly into the camera now, not at him. "Last year you called protesters in Minneapolis a mob of violent agitators. And 6 months later, when truck drivers in Idaho blocked roads over vaccine mandates, you called them patriotic citizens taking a stand." She paused. Same tactic, different skin color, different framing. A quiet murmur ran through the audience. A woman in the third row covered her mouth with her hand. Piers shifted in his seat. "Well, those were two different situations." "Were they?" she asked gently. "Both groups were protesting what they felt was unjust government action. One got tear gas, the other got sympathetic press. One was seen as dangerous, the other as brave. So tell me, Mr. Morgan, what's the common denominator in how you made those calls?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no clean exit now. "You've built a career on provoking outrage," Jasmine continued. "But when someone holds up your own words, suddenly it's a lecture about civility." Piers's face went still. Irritation flickered behind his eyes. She pressed on. "When George Floyd died," she said quietly, "you posted that America needs to do better. And I agreed with you. I really did. But 3 weeks later, you criticized black athletes for kneeling. Said politics didn't belong in sports." Somewhere behind the camera, someone chuckled softly. Jasmine didn't glance away. "You want the symbolism, not the resistance. You want the tragedy, not the noise that follows. You want black grief to be poetic, not disruptive." That line hit hard. The studio lights seemed to dim just a little. Piers looked at her. Not with smugness now, not with superiority. It was something else. Something closer to embarrassment. Jasmine didn't push for drama. She let the moment sit. "I don't need to be liked," she said simply. "That's not why I do this, but I will be heard, even if I have to drag the truth into rooms that weren't built for it." A few claps started in the audience. One person, then another. It wasn't loud, it wasn't orchestrated, but it was real. Piers tried to muster another smile. It didn't carry any weight. "Well," he offered, "you certainly came with your notes." She met his gaze, calm, unflinching. "No," she said. "I came with my experience. You call it notes because you didn't expect someone like me to be this ready." The control room was dead silent. No chatter, no countdowns. Not even a whispered correction. The producer stood frozen, hand halfway raised, unsure whether to cut to commercial or just let it roll. Jasmine didn't even glance off camera. She knew the power had shifted, but she also knew this wasn't just about Piers anymore. It was about the people watching. She had tilted the balance. Now it was time to drive it home. She turned slightly toward the camera, her voice measured. "Let's talk about facts, since that seems to be the standard here. Real ones." Piers leaned back, exhaling through his nose, feigning composure, but his knee bounced under the desk. "I brought 3 examples," she continued, her voice calm, steady. "Not headlines, not Twitter threads. These come straight from court records, depositions, and public footage." The room thickened again, with tension. Jasmine wasn't improvising now. This was sharpened, prepared. She'd carried these examples with her for months, waiting for the right moment. Not rage. Research, not noise. Names. Case 1. Pasadena, California, 2021. Aaron Lowe, 27 years old. Stopped on his way home from work for a busted tail light. Dashcam shows his hands were up the entire time. Shot twice. She paused. The officer claimed he thought Aaron was reaching. Internal review cleared him, but here's the kicker. The body cam footage went missing for 6 months, then reappeared, edited. No rush, no drama, just facts. Case 2. Cleveland, Ohio, last summer. A woman named Rhonda Belton called 911 because her ex-boyfriend was trying to break into her apartment. When officers arrived, they arrested her. Disorderly conduct. Why? Because she was yelling. She spent 3 days in county, lost her job. Charges dropped. No apology. No story. Piers blinked. Finally said something. "Congresswoman, I don't dispute these are serious concerns." She cut in, still calm. "You do dispute them when you ask if I'm being emotional. When you frame my tone as angry. What you're really saying is that people like Rhonda and Aaron don't count unless their stories come gift-wrapped in politeness." He went silent again. "And here's one more," she said, reaching into her jacket and pulling out a folded document. "No theatrics, just proof. Case 3, your own quote, March 2022. On this very show you said, and I quote, 'I don't believe institutional racism exists in modern policing.' That was 3 days after the Department of Justice released a report showing disproportionate use of force on black drivers across 8 major U.S. cities, including Los Angeles." Piers cleared his throat. "The context of that quote," she held up a hand. "I know the context. I read the full transcript. You said the report wasn't conclusive, but the report had numbers, video evidence, sworn testimony. What you meant was, it wasn't convenient for your narrative." Now the audience was fully locked in, phones were out, heads were nodding. Not everyone agreed with everything, but they could tell she wasn't bluffing. Jasmine looked him dead in the socks. "I'm not here for applause, I'm not here to go viral. I'm here because I have constituents who bury their kids while TV hosts argue about how angry we're allowed to look while grieving." A quiet murmur rippled through the audience. A few leaned forward. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was lived experience laid bare. "Facts aren't weapons," she said. "But ignoring them, that is, dismissing them, that's where the damage starts." Piers looked stuck. The fire he'd come in with? Gone. What was happening now wasn't a segment. It was an education. "You can disagree with my approach," she said, her tone softening slightly. "With my tone, with my politics. But what you don't get to do is pretend I didn't come here with receipts. Or act surprised when I hold you to your own." For a moment, no one said a word. The air was thick, not tense, just still. That kind of rare silence when the truth cuts too clean to dodge. But what Jasmine said next would shift the room entirely. In the control room, a producer tapped her earpiece and whispered, "We need to cut to break." The director, glued to the monitor, waved her off. This wasn't falling apart. This was becoming television history, and they knew it. Backstage, the chatter stopped. Even the senior executives who'd dropped in for a routine check were frozen, watching it unfold with wide eyes. The cameraman adjusted his focus with a shaky hand. He'd filmed for 16 years. He'd seen yelling, bluffing, meltdowns. But he'd never seen someone dismantle a reputation like this, without raising their voice, cursing, or breaking a sweat. In the audience, a guy in a gray hoodie whispered, "She's cooking him," just loud enough for his row to chuckle. Piers wasn't chuckling. His eyes flicked toward his producer off stage, who was now signaling with both hands. Stretch or salvage, depending on who you asked. Jasmine, unfazed, adjusted the mic on her lapel. She wasn't performing. She was just steady. Not a bead of sweat, not a shaky blink. She wasn't rattled, she was leading. Piers scrambled. "Congresswoman," he said, suddenly stiff. "I think there's a difference between anecdotal examples and systemic conclusions. Wouldn't you agree?" Her lips barely curled. "Of course there is, which is why I brought federal reports, body cam footage, judicial statistics. If you think those are anecdotes, maybe your bar for evidence is just different." A snort came from behind camera 2. The tech tried to stifle it, but it slipped out. The audience picked up on it. The thing was, Jasmine wasn't smug. She wasn't doing this to humiliate him. What was landing wasn't her strength. It was how calmly she carried it. And then came the moment no one expected. One of the studio assistants, 23 years old, first job out of Fresno State, forgot himself and started clapping. Just twice. A soft, hesitant pop-pop that echoed under the rafters. Piers heard it. And that's when the facade cracked. "Is this a talk show or a rally now?" he said sharply, glancing off stage. Jasmine didn't flinch. "It's a moment of accountability, something that should be more common, don't you think?" A few more claps followed, not choreographed, just natural, instinctive. People weren't reacting because she performed. They were reacting because someone had finally said the thing they'd been yelling at their screens for years. Jasmine sat upright, voice calm. "I'm not here to humiliate you, Mr. Morgan. That's not the point, but I will say this. When you make a career out of questioning everyone else's credibility, you better be ready to defend your own." Piers didn't answer right away. He looked down, not at his note, at blank pages, like someone searching for solid ground on a rug that had already been pulled. The director signaled sharply, "Cut to break." A producer's voice cracked in. The floor manager's earpiece. "Cut it before it gets worse." The screen behind them began to dim. The segment was ending. But the air hadn't cleared. It was thick, like the calm after a thunderstorm. As the lights dipped for commercial, Jasmine remained seated, focused, steady. Piers adjusted his mic, his face a strange mix of frustration and regret. But no one was looking at him anymore. Every eye in that room, in the control booth, the crew, the audience, was locked on Jasmine, not because she had shouted, not because she had attacked, but because she reminded everyone that the truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't need a performance to be powerful. As powerful as that moment in the studio was, it was nothing compared to what happened once the cameras cut and the internet got involved. Backstage, chaos. Producers scrambled. One was already dialing PR. Another had Twitter open, eyes wide as they watched the first clips go live. Jasmine's last 2 lines, "I came with my experience and be ready to defend your own," had already been screen recorded, captioned, and posted by someone in the control room. Piers was still seated, his team approaching cautiously. He waved them off. He hadn't expected this. He'd thought he could steer the conversation, maybe score a viral clip at her expense. What he got instead was something else entirely. Not a shouting match. No meltdown. No insults. He had been calmly, surgically outmaneuvered, live. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat in the green room, alone, finally. She took a breath, the long, quiet kind that comes after holding yourself still for far too long. Her assistant, Trina, walked in holding her phone. "You're trending," she said, eyes wide. "Already top 5 in the US. Hashtag is a Jasmine owned it." She held out the screen. Jasmine smiled just a little. That's gonna annoy him, Trina grinned. Oh, he's livid. Word is he's asking producers why they didn't cut sooner. But Jasmine wasn't celebrating. That wasn't her way. This wasn't about scoring points. She thought about how many people had watched that segment and finally felt seen. I just didn't want him rewriting the story again, she said quietly. Not while people out there are still paying the price, Trina nodded. You didn't just hold your own, you shifted something. And she had. Clips of the exchange were spreading fast. One showed Jasmine's calm response to being labeled emotional. Another had gone viral. A side-by-side comparison of her calling out Piers' different takes on black and white protesters. Reactions were pouring in from all sides. A conservative anchor called her performance a masterclass in staying composed. A progressive podcaster tweeted, "Best dismantling of media gaslighting I've seen in a decade." Even people who didn't usually follow politics were watching. At a bar in Tempe, Arizona, a group of college students had the video playing with subtitles on every screen. In Fresno, a high school senior showed it to her mother. "She talks like you," she said. That was the shift. Not just the clapping, not just the trending hashtags, but the way it made people feel, like someone had finally spoken up in a way that didn't bend or break for approval. Later that day, as the dust was still settling, an audio tech who'd worked the segment approached Jasmine quietly. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. She turned to him. "For what?" "For not making us feel crazy." He smiled. "We've watched people talk in circles on that stage for years, but today felt different." Jasmine didn't know what to say, she just nodded. "Thank you for saying that." He walked away. She stood there in the quiet for a moment. Trina came back in with a smirk. "They want you back next month." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Same show?" "Yep." "Same host?" Trina nodded. Jasmine tilted her head. "I'll think about it." Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered. Word had traveled too fast for security to stop it. Some were reporters, but most were just regular people. Students, moms with toddlers, teachers, standing hoping to catch a glimpse. Jasmine stepped out. She didn't wave like a celebrity. She didn't pose for photos. She gave a soft smile and nodded once. This wasn't about fame. It never had been. She had come for a conversation and left something bigger behind. A reminder that truth doesn't need permission to be heard. But what came next turned a viral moment into a national echo. By early evening, the clip had reached over 12 million views. No background music, no editing. Just a raw upload of Jasmine, sitting across from Piers Morgan, speaking with calm precision. No shouting, no spin, just clarity. News anchors debated it. Talk radio hosts dissected it. Comment sections exploded. But something different was happening, in spaces that usually get overlooked. In Jackson, Mississippi, a high school debate team paused their after-school practice to watch the full segment. Their teacher streamed it on the projector. "Watch your posture," he said. "That's how you handle pressure." In Fort Wayne, a grandmother sent the link to her church group. "This woman speaks for us." Even people who disagreed with her politics admitted one thing. She had poise. She didn't just respond. She led. By 8 p.m., hashtags like "Aux Jasmine owned it," "Say it plain," and "Composure is power" were trending, but Jasmine hadn't tweeted a word. No statement, no thread, no quote card. She didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. Piers, meanwhile, had gone silent. No follow-up segment, no fiery blog post. His team issued a vague statement through the network's PR office. Something about respecting differing opinions and robust dialogue, but it didn't land. People had seen what happened. No editing could spin it now. Inside her hotel room that night, Jasmine sat on the bed, legs folded under her, laptop closed. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, but she let it. She wasn't chasing the noise. Trina sat across the room scrolling through texts. "Your auntie in Baton Rouge said she had to turn her hearing aid down. Said she ain't never heard you this clear before." Jasmine laughed softly. "She always says that." Trina looked up. "She's right. You were clear." You didn't blink. I think that's what got people. It's never about the volume, Jasmine said, mostly to herself. It's about being steady. Then came a knock on the hotel door, soft, hesitant. She opened it to find a young black woman, mid-20s, staff uniform with a name tag pinned to her blazer. Nervous. Hands clasped. "Hi," she said. "I'm sorry. I know it's probably not allowed for me to bother you. I saw what you did today, and I wanted to say thank you." Jasmine's expression softened. "You're not bothering me." The woman gave a nervous smile. "I'm usually the only black girl in the room at meetings here, and I can't tell you how many times I've been told I'm too much or hard to work with. Watching you today, I felt less crazy." Jasmine stepped aside. "What's your name?" "Kaylee." "Kaylee," she said gently. "Don't ever let anyone convince you that you have to shrink to make them comfortable. You hear me?" Kaylee nodded, eyes glassy. "Being direct isn't being rude. Being prepared isn't being aggressive. And asking to be treated fairly, that's not asking for too much." Kaylee smiled. "I needed to hear that. I think a lot of us did." They stood for a moment. No cameras, no press. Just two women, connected by something deeper than words. When Kaylee left, Jasmine stood in the doorway a little longer before slowly closing it behind her. That night, a college student in Baltimore tweeted, "Jasmine didn't argue, she didn't perform. She stood her ground and spoke like my mother would, with facts, with heart, and with grace. That's the bar now." The tweet got over 300,000 likes in 4 hours, because by then this wasn't about a viral video. It wasn't about a clapback. It had become a mirror, a moment that reflected who we listen to, who we silence, and what power looks like when it doesn't have to shout. As powerful as the applause, headlines, and reposts were, Jasmine knew that what truly mattered was what came the next day, when the noise faded and the work resumed. She never aimed to be a trending topic. Moments fade. She wanted something that would last. The next morning before the sun rose, Jasmine was already awake, sitting by the window in her hotel room with a lukewarm mug of coffee. The San Fernando Valley outside was still dark. Her inbox was chaos. Dozens of messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, 4 missed calls from her comms director, and multiple interview requests from national shows. But she wasn't rushing. Her staff urged her to ride the wave, drop a statement, book the shows, get in front of every microphone. But Jasmine didn't want to be the story. She wanted to move the story forward. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in a plain black blazer, hair pulled back, and logged into a Zoom call with her district team in Texas. She waved lightly. "Morning." Her chief of staff, Russell, grinned. "You blew up the internet, and here you are logging into housing committee updates like it's just another Tuesday." "It is Tuesday," Jasmine said. "And just because folks are tweeting doesn't mean the rent's getting cheaper." That was Jasmine, steady, unbothered by the spotlight, focused on the work. Meanwhile, back in Burbank, the network's internal chat servers were buzzing. Producers, hosts, and even interns couldn't stop talking about how the segment went off script, how the audience leaned in, how even the quietest stagehand had asked for the raw footage to show his daughter. Piers Morgan's team was deep in damage control. He declined all interview requests and canceled a scheduled appearance on another network later that day. A few of his usual defenders started hedging their commentary. "It's not about winning or losing," one radio host said cautiously. "It was a tough conversation. That's journalism." But everyone knew the truth. There was no saving it, and the clip? Still everywhere. It wasn't just in political circles. It had spread to classrooms, podcasts, group chats, and locker rooms. Teachers were posting it. Pastors were referencing it. Even sports commentators were quoting Jasmine. One NBA player reposted her quote, "Being prepared isn't being aggressive," with the caption, "that part." But Jasmine wasn't checking her mentions. She was drafting a letter. Later that day, she walked into a small conference room in a community center in South Dallas. No media, no cameras, just her, a couple of staffers, and about 20 local parents. The flyer had been printed 2 weeks earlier, Know Your Rights, a community legal session with Rep. Jasmine Crockett. Every seat was filled. One mother brought a folder of her son's expired tickets. A man asked about housing code violations. A teen asked how to organize a school board meeting. Jasmine answered each question carefully. No ego, no shortcuts, no mention of the interview, and no one brought it up either, because what mattered to those parents wasn't that she had gone viral. It was that she had shown up, like she always did. That week, she quietly posted a short video on her social media. No background music, no flashy cuts, just her sitting in her office. "I want to thank everyone who reached out. The love has been overwhelming," she said. "But I hope what stuck with you wasn't just what I said. It's why I said it. I didn't go on that show to be viral. I went to speak for the people who don't get invited to tables like that, and I'll keep showing up for them, whether the cameras are on or not." That video hit harder than the studio moment. It reminded people that what they saw wasn't lightning in a bottle. It was years of listening, learning, and refusing to shrink. In Bakersfield, a teacher used it in her civics class. In Tallahassee, a nonprofit asked to use it in their organizer training. In Flagstaff, a teenager messaged Jasmine's office to say, "You helped me stand up to my teacher today when she said racism isn't real anymore. I didn't yell. I just told her what I knew." That was the real aftermath. Not silencing someone on television, but giving people permission to speak, clearly, confidently, without apology. But Jasmine wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, she stood behind a podium in a modest auditorium on the south side of El Paso. No big lights, no national cameras, just rows of folding chairs and real people. Mothers with strollers, veterans in ball caps, teenagers with notebooks, elders in Sunday shirts. It was a community event hosted by local organizers. Volunteers set out bottled water. Someone's uncle ran the sound from a dusty laptop. Jasmine didn't come to give a speech. She came to listen. For over an hour, people lined up and shared stories. Housing denials, racial profiling, working, 2 jobs and still falling behind. Nothing new. Everything real. Then came the question everyone had been circling. How do we keep going when it feels like nobody's really listening? Jasmine stepped to the mic. She looked tired, not worn down, but worked. The kind of tired that comes from doing the job instead of talking about it. She paused, looked around, then said, "They don't listen until you make them." The room went still. You don't always get a camera. You don't always get a mic. But that doesn't mean your story isn't worth telling. She looked out across the room, her voice steady. "I got lucky that day on television. I didn't win anything. I just reminded folks that we don't owe anyone softness when we're telling the truth." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. "Too often," she continued, "people ask us to shrink before they'll hear us. Be quieter, be gentler, be nicer. But they never ask that of the people ignoring our pain." She leaned slightly forward. "But here's what I learned that day, and what I want all of you to carry with you. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard." A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man at the back crossed his arms and nodded slowly. "We're told to wait our turn, to say it better, to wait until people are ready to listen. But if we keep waiting for perfect conditions, we'll grow old waiting." Jasmine let the silence breathe. "I didn't speak on that show to clap back. I spoke because I was done asking permission to be taken seriously." And with that, the point was laid bare. It wasn't about fame or going viral. It was about the ripple effect of telling the truth when it's inconvenient, in rooms where people don't expect it, with the kind of calm that makes others stop and ask themselves why they're uncomfortable. "Courage," she said, "is not always a shout. Sometimes it's the quietest sentence in the room that changes everything." The applause that followed wasn't loud or long, but it was real. It was the kind that stays with you, long after the chairs are folded up and the lights turned off. After the event, as the crowd thinned and chairs scraped softly against the floor, a teenager approached Jasmine in the hallway. Tall, skinny, nervous. He clutched his phone like a lifeline. "Do you remember that clip that went viral?" asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine smiled gently. "I do." He nodded, eyes flicking down, then back up. "I didn't think people like you existed." She looked him in the eye, calm and sure. "People like you exist," she said. "I just happened to have a mic that day." That was the truth. The power wasn't in the camera. It wasn't in the segment. It was in how that moment traveled. From a soundstage in Burbank to a living room in Cincinnati, to a cafeteria in Albuquerque, to a park bench in Milwaukee. The words weren't just hers anymore. They belonged to every person who'd ever been told they were too loud, too direct, too complicated, just for speaking plainly. When Jasmine left the auditorium that evening, she didn't take the applause with her. She left it behind, in the hands of the people who needed it more. The parking lot was quiet. No flashes, no interviews, just the soft, grounded rhythm of her footsteps on pavement. No ceremony, no performance, just presence. Because real change doesn't always come in noise. Sometimes it comes in the pause after truth has landed. If this story moved you, if something in it made you sit up straighter or think a little deeper, take a second to ask yourself where your voice matters, whether anyone's watching or not. And if it does matter to you, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep telling the stories that don't ask for permission.